The silence in the ornate chambers pressed down from the high vaulted ceilings and rose from the polished obsidian floors that reflected a distorted image of the man standing at the window. Tehran Reeves stared out at the alien sky, a swirl of emerald and gold clouds above a city of elegant crystalline structures. He was a prisoner, and the gilded bars of his cage were luxury and isolation. The treaty had called him an ambassador of peace, but the Saffron warriors in the halls called him the war tribute. He was the living embodiment of humanity's surrender. 3 weeks ago, he had been commander, Tehran Reeves of Earth's Defense Force. Now, he was simply the human, the last piece of a complicated political puzzle that had ended the bloodiest interstellar conflict in recorded history. His life had become a routine of quiet observation. He ate the exotic food left on hovering platters. He used the peculiar bathing facilities that somehow cleaned without water. He slept on fabrics that adjusted to his body temperature. And always, he felt her eyes on him. Empress Navira of the Saffron Collective did not need to be physically present to exert her influence. Her contempt was a palpable force throughout the palace, a cold fury rooted in fresh grief. Her consort, Jareth, had been killed in the final offensive of the war, killed by humans. The doors to his chambers slid open with a musical chime. She stood there, flanked by 2 of her royal sentinels in their iridescent armor. She was terrifying in her beauty, tall and regal, her skin a pale blue that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. Her eyes large and entirely black, lacking any visible iris or sclera. A crown of metallic tendrils framed her face, shifting subtly with her emotions. "You will remain here today," she said, her voice melodic despite its coldness. "The royal heirs will be in the Eastern Pavilion. Your presence is not required." Her words were constant reminders of his status and object, a piece of the treaty to be managed and contained. Tehran gave a slow, deliberate nod. He offered no argument. He offered nothing. This stillness, this refusal to be provoked, seemed to disturb her more than any defiance could. She held his gaze for a moment longer, her head tilting slightly as if trying to decipher a particularly difficult puzzle. Before she turned and was gone, the doors closed, and the silence returned, heavier than before. Hours later, that silence was shattered. A resonant alarm began to pulse through the palace, not the shriek of an external attack, but a solemn rhythmic tone that signaled internal crisis. Tehran felt the subtle shift in the air, the vibration in the floor beneath his feet. Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Shouted commands in the fluid Saffron language cut through the air. Tehran moved to the center of the room, his body falling into a state of relaxed readiness, a muscle memory from 100 battlefields. The doors to his chamber opened with a harsh sound. Not the usual musical chime, but the discordant noise of an emergency override. Empress Navira stood in the entryway, her face a mask of terrible calm. Behind her, her chief sentinel, a stern-faced female named Jiril, held a weapon that hummed with barely contained energy. "Where are they?" Navira demanded, the words not a question, but an accusation. Tehran kept his hands visible at his sides. "Where are who?" "My sons," she snarled. "The heirs. They are missing from their chambers." Her gaze swept the room, looking for hidden spaces, secret passages. Her suspicion was a physical force. She saw him not as a man, but as a monster from the war, an enemy capable of any atrocity. She believed he had taken her children. "I have been here since you last saw me," Tehran stated calmly. Jiril made a sharp, dismissive sound. Navira raised a hand, silencing her subordinate. She took a step into the room, her movements fluid and predatory. An older Saffron with elaborate facial markings appeared behind her. He murmured something in her ear, his expression grave. Her head snapped toward him. Then back to Tehran. A new wave of fury washed over her face. "The gardens," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You were seen near the gardens." She did not wait for his response. She turned and strode from the room, her sentinels falling in around her. Tehran was seized by 2 of them, his arms locked behind his back, and marched through the grand corridors of the palace. He offered no resistance. In her current state, Any struggle would be met with his immediate execution. They moved through opulent halls and down service passageways, the air gradually filling with the scent of exotic flora. They reached the massive doors of the royal gardens, and the sentinels pushed them open. Navira swept inside, her hand resting on the weapon at her hip. She was prepared to kill him, to extract the truth through violence. Her eyes scanned the vast space. Past glowing plants and floating orbs of water where strange creatures swam in lazy circles, and then she froze. In the far corner, beside a towering tree with luminous blue leaves, was Turan. He was not armed. He was not preparing an escape. He was sitting cross-legged on the soft ground, and sleeping peacefully against his broad chest were her 2 young sons, their pale blue skin a stark contrast to his tanned human complexion. The fury in Navira's face did not vanish. It was locked in a war with confusion. Her mind, so certain of his guilt, could not process the scene of absolute tranquility before her. The fury in Empress Navira's face did not vanish immediately. It was locked in a battle with profound confusion as she stared at the scene before her. Her twin sons, Brel and Fenris, slept peacefully against the human's chest. The royal heirs, guarded by the most elite sentinels in the collective, had somehow found their way to the war prisoner. The royal sentinel Jirel stepped forward, weapon raised. "Step away from the princes," she commanded. Torin lifted a finger to his lips, a universal gesture for silence. The simple paternal act was so incongruous with Navira's image of him as a human butcher that it felt like a physical blow. "They're sleeping," he whispered.
But
"They've only just settled." Navira raised a hand, halting Jirel's advance. She approached cautiously, her movements predatory yet uncertain. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice a strained whisper. "They were distressed," Turan explained simply. "They missed their father. I found them hiding behind the memorial fountain." His explanation was so straightforward, so devoid of manipulation, that it seemed absurd. The royal heirs, protected by the most advanced security in the collective, had simply walked away from their guardians because they were grieving. "You took them from their chambers," she accused. "They sought me out," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "Your sentinels are trained for assassins and invaders, not for 2 quiet children walking through corridors they know well." At the sound of their voices, the younger twin, Fenris, stirred against Turan's chest. He made a soft noise and snuggled closer, his small hand clutching the fabric of the human's tunic. The sight sent another tremor of confusion through Navira. Hours later, in the throne room, debate raged among her advisors. "He manipulated them," Jirel insisted, her posture rigid with indignation. "It was a test of our security, a human tactic." Perhaps the elder advisor Venner murmured thoughtfully. "But the result remains the princes were safe." They were comforted. Navira stood before the crystalline throne, her back to them all. She replayed the scene in her mind, the gentleness of the human's hands, the absolute trust her sons had shown him. He was a soldier. She knew what human soldiers were capable of. She had seen their efficient brutality in battle, but she had never conceived of this quiet, protective presence. It did not align with her understanding of their species. "He is a threat," Jirel pressed. "He must be confined more strictly." "No," Navira said, her voice resonating with sudden authority. She turned to face them, her expression unreadable. "Confining him has made us blind. We watch his prison, not him. The arrangement is not working." She paused, her dark eyes sweeping over her stunned council. "Move his quarters to the antechamber of the royal nursery. He will be assigned as their personal guardian." A collective gasp filled the room. Jirel stepped forward in protest. "Your Radiance, to place the enemy so close—" "I am not placing the enemy near them," Navira cut her off, her voice like ice. "I am placing my prisoner where I can watch him myself. Every moment, every breath, he will not leave my sight. Is that understood?" Jirel clamped her jaw shut and bowed her head. "Yes, Your Radiance." The decree was absolute. The human was no longer just a hostage. He was being brought into the very heart of the royal family, a chain pulled so tight that it was now a collar held. directly in the Empress's hand. Or perhaps, she considered with a disturbing realization, it was the other way around. Life with Turan in the royal wing became a study in quiet disruption. He moved into the antechamber, a space that connected her chambers to the nursery with a soldier's economy. He had few possessions, yet his presence filled the entire wing. It was in the faint scent of his alien skin, the heavier tread of his footsteps, the deep silence that emanated from his room at night. Navra found herself watching him constantly. It was her stated purpose, after all, to observe. But her observation quickly lost its clinical edge. She watched him with her sons. The sight was a constant source of dissonance. Sephiran culture was not physically demonstrative. Affection was shown through duty, through protection, through the rigorous training that prepared the next generation for leadership and survival. Turan was different. He would sit on the floor with the twins for hours, his large frame folded to meet their small world. He taught them a simple human game with colored stones that required strategy and patience. When Brel grew frustrated and scattered the pieces, Turan did not scold him. He simply helped him begin again. When Fenris cut his hand on a decorative crystal in the courtyard, Turan cleaned the wound with a tenderness that made Navira's breath catch in her throat. He lifted the child into his arms, and her son, who would squirm away from his own mother's formal touch, wrapped his arms around the human's neck without hesitation. The nights were the most revealing. When one of the twins would cry out from a nightmare, a common occurrence since their fathers' death, it was Turan who would reach them first. His room was closer. Navira would emerge from her chambers to find him already there, a reassuring presence in the dim light. He would not say much. He would simply sit on the edge of the bed, his presence a bulwark against the darkness, until the child's breathing evened out. One evening, Navira was returning to her chambers when she heard the low resonance of Turan's voice. She paused in the hallway, hidden in shadows. He was sitting in the nursery doorway, speaking with Brel. "Why don't you ever seem afraid?" her son asked, his voice full of genuine curiosity. There was a pause. Navira leaned closer to hear his reply. "Fear doesn't help in captivity," Turan said softly. "You learn to find small moments of peace where you can." "Were you a good warrior?" Brel pressed another pause, longer this time. "I survived a war that killed better warriors than me," he answered. The simple truth of that statement settled deep in Navira's consciousness. It was not a boast. It was a fact. He had survived a conflict that had claimed her mate. He had survived her hatred. And now he was surviving this gilded cage, not by fighting, but by finding peace in small moments with her children. Their accidental encounters became charged with a tension that was difficult to ignore. When they reached for the same data tablet, his fingers brushed against hers. A jolt, sharp and unexpected, shot through her arm. She pulled her hand back abruptly. He merely inclined his head and stepped away, giving her space, his face impassive. But she had seen the flicker in his eyes, the subtle tension in his jaw. He felt it too. The Royal Botanical Observatory was a masterpiece of xenobotany, a massive dome containing specimens from 100 worlds. It was the twins' favorite place to explore. Navira watched from a raised platform as Turan stood a respectful distance from Brel and Fenris. A silent guardian amidst the riot of alien flora. Brel was examining bioluminescent fungi near a shallow pool, while Fenris was collecting fallen seed pods along a winding path. Royal sentinels were posted at regular intervals, visible and alert. The scene was perfectly peaceful. The attack came without warning. From the dense foliage of a terrestrial section, a figure emerged, moving with such speed that it seemed to blur. It was humanoid, but clearly not Sephiran, its body covered in adaptive camouflage technology that had allowed it to remain hidden among the plants. It moved directly toward Fenris, who stood frozen in shock. Navira's heart stopped. The sentinels were already reacting, but they were too far away. She screamed her son's name, a raw, terrified sound. Turan did not shout. He moved. His body, which so often seemed defined by calm stillness, became a blur of explosive action. He was not graceful, like a Sephiran warrior who would have met the threat with elegant precision. His movement was a straight, brutal line of interception. He shoved Fenris behind him with one arm, a sweeping motion that sent the child tumbling safely away. Then he met the assassin's charge with his own body. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't need one. As the attacker lunged with a vibroblade, Toron pivoted, using the assassin's momentum against them. He caught the weapon arm, twisted, and there was a sickening crack as the joint separated. The blade clattered to the ground. The attacker, a member of the Krell species, hired mercenaries known throughout the sector, retaliated with a secondary weapon. A neural disruptor pressed against Toron's side, discharging with a sharp electronic pulse. Toron didn't cry out. A low grunt was torn from his throat, a sound of pure effort. Despite the pain that must have been coursing through his nervous system, he maintained his grip on the assassin. With a final surge of strength, he drove his opponent to the ground and rendered them unconscious with a precise strike to the head. The entire encounter lasted less than 10 seconds. Toron stood panting over the fallen assassin, his body trembling with the after effects of the neural disruptor. He looked at Fenris, who stared at him with wide, terrified eyes. He gave the child a short, reassuring nod, a gesture that seemed to say, "You're safe now." Then his legs buckled, and he dropped to one knee. His face contorted in pain. The sentinels finally converged, their weapons raised, their expressions a mixture of shock and shame. Navira was already moving, descending from the platform, her mind a maelstrom of terror, fury, and a terrifying surge of something else, something that felt dangerously like gratitude. "Bring him to the medical chamber," she commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. Now the sentinels hesitated, unused to providing medical care to the human prisoner. "Did you not hear me?" she snarled. They complied instantly, helping Toron to his feet. As they supported him from the observatory, Navira knelt beside her son, checking him for injuries. "Finding none?" Navira replied, a storm of emotions, making her voice unsteady. "Yes, he did." Hours later, in the secure medical chamber, Toron lay on a diagnostic platform. The neural disruptor had caused significant trauma to his nervous system. Recovery would be painful and slow. Navira dismissed the medical attendants. She demanded, ignoring his concern, "Why risk your life for a child of your enemy?" Toron looked at her, his expression betraying genuine confusion at her question. "He's a child," he said simply, as if that explained everything. "You could have used this," she continued, her voice taut with emotion. "You could have demanded concessions, better treatment." "Is that what you would have done?" he asked quietly. The question struck her like a physical blow. Before she could formulate a response, the doors slid open. Venner entered, his ancient face grave with concern. "The assassin was Krell," he reported. "A specialist. The preliminary interrogation reveals troubling information." He glanced at Turan, clearly reluctant to speak freely in front of the human. "Continue," Navira commanded. "The contract originated from within the collective," Venner said, his voice dropping. "Someone in the inner circle arranged this attempt on the princes. The implications were staggering. Someone close to her, someone she trusted. Wanted her children dead. There's more," Venner added, his gaze shifting between the Empress and the human. "The assassin claims they were instructed to make it appear as though the human was responsible." A cold fury rose in Navira's chest. Someone had not only tried to kill her sons, but had also planned to use the human as a scapegoat. Knowing how readily she would believe in his guilt, "Who?" she demanded. "The assassin doesn't know," Venner replied. "The contract was arranged through multiple proxies to hide the true source." Navira turned to Turan, who had listened to this exchange in silence. His eyes met hers, and she saw no surprise in them, only a weary acceptance. As if he had always known he might be blamed for crimes he didn't commit. "You saved my son knowing you might be framed for attacking him," she said, the realization dawning on her. "It wasn't a calculation," he replied. "It was a child in danger." In that moment, something fundamental shifted in Navira's understanding of the human before her. The enemy she had constructed in her mind, the monster she had needed him to be to justify her hatred, was crumbling in the face of his simple, uncompromising humanity. "Leave us," she commanded Venner, who bowed and withdrew from the chamber. Alone again with Turan, she approached the diagnostic platform. Without speaking, she activated the medical systems, initiating the accelerated healing protocols that would ease his pain and speed his recovery. "Someone in my court wants my children dead," she said, her voice steady, despite the rage and fear churning within her. "And they intended to use you as the perfect villain." "I'm aware," he replied, watching her carefully. "Why aren't you angry?" she asked. "You've been hated, imprisoned, and now nearly framed for assassination, all because of what you are, not who you are." A faint, tired smile touched his lips. "Anger requires energy I can't spare." She stared at him, truly seeing him perhaps for the first time, not as a symbol of her enemy, not as a piece in a political game, but as a man trapped in circumstances beyond his control, who had nonetheless chosen to protect rather than harm. "Rest," she said finally, her voice softer than she had intended. "We will speak more when you are recovered." As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Empress," he said, "whoever did this will try again. The princes aren't safe." She looked back at him, at the genuine concern in his eyes, and nodded once. "I know," she replied, "but this time we'll be ready." As she left the medical chamber, thought formed in her mind, dangerous and revolutionary. Perhaps the human wasn't just a prisoner anymore. Perhaps he was becoming something else entirely, an ally, in a battle she hadn't known she was fighting. 3 days after the assassination attempt, Turan was moved to new quarters, not back to the antechamber, but to a suite directly connected to the royal nursery. The symbolism was not lost on the court. The human prisoner was now openly acknowledged as the prince's protector. The shift in status came with increased freedoms. Turan was permitted to move throughout the central palace with minimal escort. He was given access to the collective's historical archives. Most significantly, he was invited to attend select council sessions seated at the far end of the table. Silent but present court reaction was divided. Some, like Jarrell, remained openly hostile, their hands never straying far from their weapons when he was near. Others, particularly those who had witnessed his defense of Prince Fenris, treated him with a cautious respect. Empress Navira's attitude was the most complex transformation. Her previous cold hatred had given way to something more nuanced, a wary alliance born of necessity. Someone within her inner circle wanted her sons dead, and the human had proven himself their most effective defender. The princes should be moved to the summer palace, Councillor Dravos suggested during a private strategy session. He was a recent addition to Navira's advisory circle, elevated after several senior officials had perished in the war. It's more easily defended, with fewer points of access, and more isolated. With fewer witnesses if something goes wrong, Turan observed quietly. All eyes turned to him. It was the first time he had spoken unprompted in council. "You disagree with the recommendation?" Navira asked, her tone neutral. "Isolation rarely improves security," Turan replied. "It only creates the illusion of it." Dravos bristled. "The summer palace has served as a royal sanctuary for generations, which makes it predictable," Turan countered. "The best protection isn't in changing locations, but in controlling who has access to information about the prince's movements." The tension in the room was palpable. Venner, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "The human's assessment aligns with traditional military doctrine," he acknowledged. "A restricted information flow would be more effective than relocation." Navira studied Turan thoughtfully. "What would you suggest instead, Commander?" she asked, deliberately using his former military rank for the first time. "A false vulnerability," he answered without hesitation. "Make it appear as though the princes had been moved secretly, but with a trail just discoverable enough to be found by someone looking. Meanwhile, enhance security around their actual location." "You propose using the princes as bait," Jarrell said, her voice sharp with disapproval. "No," Turan corrected firmly. "I propose creating the illusion of an opportunity while eliminating actual risk. The princes remain here, protected, while we expose whoever is seeking to harm them." Navira considered his strategy, then nodded once. "Begin preparations," she ordered. Venner arranged the false evidence of relocation. "Girl, select a team of your most trusted sentinels, those whose loyalty is beyond question. As the council dispersed, Navira gestured for Turan to remain. When they were alone, she approached him, stopping closer than protocol would normally permit. "If this fails," she said quietly, "if any harm comes to my sons, you will wish for the swift death you nearly received in the gardens." He met her gaze steadily. "If harm comes to your sons, Empress, I won't need your executioners." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. It wasn't bravado or manipulation, it was a simple statement of truth. He had committed himself to the protection of her children, with the same unflinching resolve he had once brought to the battlefield. "Why?" She asked the question that had lingered since the first moment she found him with her sleeping sons. "Why care for the children of your enemy?" Turan was silent for a moment, considering his answer carefully. "Perhaps," he finally said, "because in them I see what we were fighting for, not territory or resources or power, but a future worth protecting." The trap was set the following day. Carefully orchestrated rumors spread through the palace about a secret relocation of the princes. Decoy transports were prepared. Select servants were allowed to overhear discussions of security arrangements for the summer palace. Meanwhile, the princes remained in their usual chambers, though with enhanced security measures. Turan rarely left their side, teaching them human games to keep them occupied and unaware of the tension surrounding them. That night, as the palace settled into its nocturnal cycle, Turan sat beside the window in the prince's bedroom, watching them sleep. Navira entered silently, moving to stand beside him. "Nothing yet," she murmured. "Patience," he replied. "If our conspirator is as careful as they've been so far, I'll wait until they're certain of success." They stood together in companionable silence, watching over the sleeping children. It was a strange moment of peace in what had been months of hostility and suspicion. "When this is over," Navira said softly, "what do you want?" The question caught him off guard. "Want? As reward?" she clarified. "If we identify the traitor and ensure my son's safety, what would you ask for? Your freedom? Return to Earth?" Turan looked out at the alien sky, considering the question. Earth seemed distant now, almost abstract. He had been a soldier for so long that peace felt foreign to him. "I haven't thought about it," he admitted. The weeks following Dravos's capture brought significant changes to the palace. Through careful interrogation, Benor had uncovered a network of conspirators, military officers, and officials who believed the peace with humanity was a mistake, who saw the royal princes as obstacles to renewed conflict. The purge was swift and decisive. Navira's justice was firm but measured, distinguishing between active plotters and those who had merely failed to report suspicious activities. Throughout the process, Turan was often at her side, offering insights into human military psychology that helped identify the extent of the conspiracy. His status within the palace had transformed entirely. No longer a prisoner or even merely a guardian, he had become something unprecedented, an advisor to the Empress on both internal security and human relations. The treaty that had made him a hostage was quietly amended, redesignating him as an official ambassador. On the balcony of the Royal Observatory, Turan stood beside Navira, watching the twins play in the gardens below. Brel was showing his brother how to construct a small fort using techniques Turan had taught him, human military engineering adapted to a child's game. "They're resilient," Turan observed. "Children often are." Navira nodded. "They've experienced more turmoil in their short lives than many adults. First losing their father, then becoming targets, ... She paused, watching as Fenris successfully balanced a structure and looked up proudly, seeking Turan's approval. "But they've also gained something unexpected. Security isn't just about physical protection," Turan said, understanding her meaning. "It's about feeling safe enough to grow. A concept not emphasized in Sefran children," she admitted. "We focus on strength, on readiness for future responsibilities. The concept of childhood as its own valuable state is not our tradition." Turan smiled slightly. "Cultural exchange works in unexpected ways." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Navira spoke again. The Galactic Council has requested your presence at their next session, she said, as has your Earth government. Your insights,